both Labour and the government today are announcing their own COVID rescue plans to help children in England catch up on lost lessons.
The Education Secretary's proposal includes offering students up to 100 million hours of free tuition, whilst Labour's two-year recovery plan suggests expanding extracurricular activities and breakfast clubs. Joining us now is Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green. Kate Green, thanks for joining us. Before we get into all this very important stuff about education and schools, a lot of people talking about the big interview last night with your leader, Keir Starmer, Live Stories with Piers Morgan. Did you watch it?
I did.
And what's your summation? Getting up this morning, do you feel the Labour Party is in a stronger position because of it?
I think people will have more of a sense of Keir, of the kind of guy he is, of the kind of things that have shaped his politics that have really mattered to him. They'll have heard him talking very movingly about his family, about his own life growing up, and about his mum and his dad, and now his wife and family. And I think they'll have a real sense of what's important to Keir. So I thought it was a very moving interview and very funny.
Why do you think it's important for a politician like that? We're going to be debating this later, actually, to open up about their private life. Is it, you know, is that what the public wants, you think? People want to know the personal details of our leaders and opposition leaders?
Well, people are always entitled to personal privacy and to protect their families. But I think the public want and are right to want to know why people believe in what they believe and why they've got the values they have, and particularly for politicians, what it is that they want to do in politics. And I think the interview Keir gave to Piers Morgan yesterday gave people a real insight into that, what's important to him, how much he cares, and how hard he'll fight when things get tough. So I hope people saw that side of him as well. I certainly did yesterday.
Would you do it?
Would I be leader of the Labour Party?
No,
oh, no, there isn't a vacancy, and I wouldn't want to do it if there were.
Would you do an interview like that?
I would always be quite protective of my family's privacy, and I think Keir was able to do as much of that as he could. But it's a tough thing, and, you know, I think everybody would ask themselves, how much of that would I want to talk about on television?
All right, let's talk about unlocking on June the 21st. Of course, we've got the education brief to talk about. We've got Gavin Williamson coming on too. But I suppose across the board, whether you've got children or not today, people are still asking whether, you know, we've had the first day of no COVID death yesterday, whether that's a false dawn or not because of the Indian variant that is going to push up eventually some hospital admissions across the country at some point, and is already doing so in parts of the northwest of England. What's your view at this stage, given the fact that Nicola Sturgeon has decided to slow down the unlocking by a few weeks so that more people can be vaccinated? There's pressure on the Prime Minister to not do that in England. Where do you stand on that this morning as to whether the roadmap out of this for June the 21st, we should stick to it, because there's actually a lot at stake here for businesses and generally for all of our lives to get back to some sort of normality?
Yeah, I mean, I understand how very tough this has been for businesses, and for all of us, as you say, we've been living quite an isolated and quite uneasy life over the last 14 or 15 months, and we are all desperate to get back to normal, but it must be done safely, and it must be done in the light of what the data are telling the government about when and to what extent it would be safe to completely relax the restrictions. So I would just say to the government, don't jump to conclusions. Don't act too fast and then repent later. Be really aware of what the data is saying and what information it's giving about vaccination rates, about the spread of the new variants, about hospitalisations before you make a decision, because nobody wants to see us going backwards again. And there are already worrying signs that our third wave may be starting. So it is really important that it's a data-driven decision.
So, I mean, they are going to make a decision on June the 14th, we're told, but from where you're standing now, I mean, we all have access to all that data, don't we? So what is Labour's view on unlocking on June the 21st? Should it go ahead or shouldn't it, where we stand today?
Well, let's see where we are on June the 14th. You know, they've very carefully set up these timelines and dates so that there's time to gather complete enough data to make an informed decision. It would be wrong to rush in today and make assumptions about June the 21st when we're still getting that data gathered in.
OK. Let's talk education then. Today you published a new education plan for the immediate post-COVID period. The government have also announced their plans, which is more tutoring for all pupils, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. So they've already got that covered off. I'm looking at your proposals. Quality mental health support, I think most people would agree with that. Continued development for teachers, I imagine that's happening. Then you come out with something called breakfast clubs. I mean, it just feels like, is that the policy? Is that the new breakfast clubs? It just feels like a nice little term that might sound nice. What does that actually mean?
It's a package of proposals that we're putting forward this morning. Yes, including the tutoring, and our tutoring programme would aim to reach many, many more children than the government so far has managed to do. Yes, investing in good quality teacher training, because we know how important teachers and school staff are to children's learning and development.
How much would that cost?
You're absolutely right about... Well, the whole package, as you will have seen, we've put out the detailed costs for each element of it, and the total package over 2 years is just under £15 billion. So that, funnily enough, is pretty much what the government's own education czar has recommended needs to be spent on children's educational recovery. And so it's very disappointing that the government's own offer is falling so far short of that. But to your point about breakfast clubs and about mental health and extracurricular activities, we know from talking to teachers, mums and dads, that there is as much concern about children's social and emotional well-being as there is rightly about their lost learning. And that's why we've said that activities that enhance the school day, sport, drama, using all schools' wonderful facilities for those additional activities, and yes, breakfast clubs, because there's good evidence that a good breakfast and time at the start of the school day with friends and school staff actually helps children's achievement and behaviour in the classroom.
So what time would the
package of support needs to be put in place?
So what time would the school day start then? What time would parents have to wake their kids up and then get them into school to get them there in time for breakfast club at all the different schools that their kids go to? What time would that start?
Well, that's a matter for individual schools. But remember, many schools run breakfast clubs already. What we're suggesting is that every school should be able to offer a breakfast, if the parents want it, and not all do, to every child. But many schools are already opening up to provide that good breakfast and that settled start to the day. Very popular with parents, including, of course, working parents. And we're just saying that should be on offer for all children.
One of the advantages, of course, of being in opposition is that you can make big plans with lots and lots of billions of pounds because you don't actually have to find it. Do you have any sympathy for Rishi Sunak at the moment, having, done what many people have classed as a very successful furlough scheme? For the majority, not all, of course. There are many who were not included who were still very upset about that. But overall, there's been, Labour-esque spending and borrowing from a Tory government, which startled all of us, I think, at the time. Do you have any sympathy at this point for Rishi Sunak, if it's to be believed, is pushing back on spending £15 billion on the kind of package that you are saying and perhaps Gavin Williamson might have wanted? Do you have any sympathy that at this point he's struggling to find that money?
He's not struggling to find that money. The government has set aside a reserve to meet COVID-related expenditure. This is about the choices that he is making about what to spend that money on. And you will not be surprised that as the Shadow Education Secretary, I'm saying that the top priority should be our children's learning and their well-being. And as I say, the government itself brought in Sir Kevin Collins, a very highly regarded education professional, to suggest how we could help children to bounce back from the pandemic in terms of their development, their learning, and really make sure that they're on the best foot forward for the rest of their lives. And that's the sort of price tag that he has suggested, but which the government has apparently balked at. Instead, they're dribbling out proposals here and there in penny packets. Now, if we don't invest now in helping children and young people come back from the pandemic, recover their learning and make sure that their well-being is attended to, then we know from independent research from economic think tanks that the true cost in the long run is going to be far, far more than the £15 billion that our package of proposals would add up to. Been suggested, for example, by the Institute for Fiscal Studies that it could amount to £300 or £400 billion in lost earnings and lost productivity in the economy. So it would be a false economy, frankly, for Rishi Sunak not to invest in children and young people at this stage.
Kate Green, just before you go, actually, there's a burgeoning issue about vaccines for those who are under 18, school-age children. Canada, various other places have started to do it. I know 600,000 children in America have had it. So what is your view in the UK, in England, whether actually children should start to be vaccinated here?
Well, I don't want to rush to judgment on this because obviously we still don't have that much research information either about the impact of the vaccine on children's own health. We've been very fortunate, I think, so far that children have not, thankfully, been prone to tremendous illness from this virus. So we wouldn't want to be putting a vaccine into their bodies that might do more harm than the risk that they face, which is very low, of becoming seriously ill from COVID. And we'd also want to know, I think, to what degree the vaccine would help to reduce the spread of infection, because clearly that is a worry when children are in and out of school and in the playgrounds and so on. So I think we need to look very carefully at the data before we rush to judgment. But I also know that where vaccination programmes work effectively and when the evidence is clear about how they should be used, it's really important that everybody who should take up the vaccine does take up the vaccine, because we won't all be safe until everybody is safe. And it's really important if people are called for the vaccine on the programme we have now, that they take it up. I've been so relieved of my 2 doses, and I'd really encourage everybody, please, when you're asked to go for your vaccine.
OK. Kate Green, thank you very much for joining us this morning.